Welcome everyone to Potentials. This is Leja and Ed Kabursky, and we are going to be announcing a very exciting adventure for Ed. He's starting his new channel called Technology Envoy, and he's going to be sharing a lot of interesting information on that. So we look forward to that. And also, we were going to talk about how Chris Beskar was just on Potentials and how we got him on the show. So actually, Ed got him on the show. And how did that happen?
Yeah, exactly. We'll go into all of that. I guess, Lisa, what we have to do, and thank you for talking about my new channel. Yeah, Technology
Sure.
Envoy, and it's going to be more engineering and technical based. That's kind of what I had in mind for
Yeah.
it. Although down the road we'll start doing some more interesting things as well with it. So I guess how did I end up meeting Chris Beskar, the CEO of Stavatti Aerospace and the designer of the hover car? And, how did we get him on your show essentially? And he's going to be returning on your show this time on camera. And that should be hopefully in the near future. And so I guess what we need to do is go right back to the very beginning, even before I was born, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Lija. It's kind of important because there's three men that are friends and family that were in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I'll talk a little bit about each one of those and how it sort of affected me as we move on through this story. So the first one is my father. He was part of NORAD, which is North American nuclear missile defense. So he was part of NORAD during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was in the Canadian Air Force, and he was a radar guy. So he worked on the DEW line, and the DEW line is the distant early warning setup, radar setup. They were looking for nuclear missiles coming over from Russia, essentially. So it was up in the high Arctic, and yeah, so that was my father. He was in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he said that I do remember him saying that they went to DEFCON 1, and DEFCON 1 is full nuclear war. So they were ready, to go at that point. And I just want to say that all these men, they're heroes because they saved the world that day, especially Kennedy. Kennedy had a huge, a part of what happened. So that's my father. And then the next person I want to talk about, and my father was in the Canadian Air Force. And the next person I want to talk about is Deacon Erdick. And Deacon, he was in the Russian Air Force during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he was on the other side. And he was also a radar guy. So he actually did the same job that my father did. And the reason why Deacon is so important is because I'll talk about some of my electronics backgrounds as we go through here, but I never ever took electronics ever in my life. What it was I learned and was mentored from Deacon. And Deacon actually came from Legia, the same area that Nikola Tesla came from. So
Same region.
the same region. So the science and the technologies are the Russians were always very they didn't hide anything, so everything was out there. And I learned from him. He sent me a series of audio tapes uh, that talked about all how to design vacuum tube amplifiers and that type of thing. And he also sent all kinds of schematics and essentially mentored me in vacuum tube electronics and high voltage electronics. So that's where I actually got it from. Even though my father was a radar tech and he could have done that as well, we didn't really see eye to eye, and working with him was kind of difficult. We actually always kind of argued, and so learning from him was never really going to be on the table, so to speak, right? But I think we carry some of this stuff in our DNA as well.
Yeah.
And he was part of the Cuban Missile Crisis and doing all those electronics before I was born. So, that would have been in him at that point. So I think some of it followed through for me as well. So Deacon is my mentor, and I think he's probably passed away now. He was about my father's age. So, like I said, he was in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the last person I want to talk about is my best friend's father. And part of the reason why I want to talk about him is he flew the U-2 and the SR-71 for Kelly Johnson. And Kelly Johnson is the Leonardo da Vinci of aircraft design, Legia. He's just amazing. And he was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. And they actually, what they did is they needed a place to test the U-2. So Kelly went out and found Area 51 and actually had the facility built. And
Oh,
why, yeah, so it's, this is a very important guy. And why I talk about him so much is because a young Chris Beskar was mentored by Kelly Johnson. Chris mentioned on the last show that we did, that he knew him and he talked to him. And if you look at the SR-71 aircraft design and compare it to the SM-39 Razor, it's very, very similar. It's almost like an evolution of that aircraft, essentially.
right.
So yeah, so that's kind of really important to always talk about Kelly Johnson because again, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, and at the time nobody knew about this stuff. It was all black projects, and it was 30, maybe even 40 years before they actually started showing some of what they actually did there. The interesting thing is with the SR-71, it was all built out of titanium, and the US didn't have any. So they actually set up companies through lettered agencies and bought titanium from the Russians to
Hmm.
build the spy plane that they spied on the Russians with.
Wow.
Right? I know,
Right.
right? That's why this story is so important. And the fact that my best friend's father flew that airplane. Um, he also flew. He was actually captured and shot down, shot down and captured 3 times. Twice in the Korean War, and once in the Cuban Missile Crisis over the Bay of Pigs. So
Wow.
he's a real war hero along with my father. Big time. And those guys again, saved the world. So that's kind of where it started for me. And then after my father got out of the military, which was right around the time that I was born, he started working for the Ministry of Transport. And he worked at the airports and he did all of the navigation and all of the electronics and everything that's electronic in the airport was his to fix and make sure that it was functioning correctly. So what happened was we lived in Calgary at the time, and I can remember being like even 4 years old and 5 before I was in school. Yeah, and my father would, I don't know how he got away with this, but he always took me to work with him. So I'm considered an airport rat kind of because
Mhm.
I literally grew up in airports, but not in the normal spots of the airports, but in places where no one else gets to go, like
Right.
where all the electronics are. Or I can remember being up in the tower, being in the tower and being up there. And I always wanted to be actually a guy that did the aircraft controller in the tower. But my father said no way because it's way too stressful, which is actually pretty true, right?
Yeah.
So that was that helped a lot because I saw all of these electronics that no one else gets to see, and I guess I was just picking up on it all as I moved along. So then my father, yeah, he worked for the Ministry of Transport, and he worked. Eventually, we got transferred up to Whitehorse, and I wanted to tell you the story because it's kind of neat. My father woke me up like 3 in the morning one winter night, and there's no light anyways up there. Like we actually would have almost darkness for I think a week or something of no light at all, right? So it was always dark. but he woke me up and he said, come with me. So we went for a really, really long drive. It was hours and hours and hours. And then we pulled up to this spot. It was just like the side of this mountain. And he jumped out and disappeared. And I was like, where did he go? And then all of a sudden, this big giant door, a garage door, opened up, and it was
Huh.
camouflaged. It was painted white, so you couldn't see it. So that's why I didn't know where he went.
Wow.
And so then this big thing opens up, the door opens up, and it's huge, right? It's huge. And he
Yeah.
pulls out, it's called a Nodwell, and it's the same kind of machine that they use at ski hills to do all the grooming and all that kind of stuff. But it
Hmm.
would be a super huge one, and like a military version of one.
Right.
And I can remember it had like 6 foot wide tracks that were made out of rubber and metal. And I can
Mhm.
remember climbing up and climbing and, walking across the 6 feet of track to get into the machine. So each side of the machine's got 6 feet of track, right? So
Hmm.
then we fired it up and we started going up the mountain, and it took us like 4 hours to get up there. And when we got up to the top, there was I'm not exactly sure what it was. It was a navigation beacon of some kind. It might have been a VOR. That's something that me and Chris talked about a little bit, I think, last time.
What does that
With,
mean?
uh, oh, I knew you were going to ask me that. It's it's uh, it's what the planes use to locate where they are, essentially. So it's like a
Yeah.
navigation beacon. And what happens is, like, we went into the building and it's just full of electronics. And my dad was like, "Don't touch anything. There's things in there that if I touch them, you could die, essentially."
Yeah.
Especially the vacuum tubes, because
Wow.
they use vacuum tubes for all of this stuff, right? So there's these big giant vacuum tubes that are so hot that, if you touched it, it would burn you. And if you broke the glass, it would kill you, literally, because of the high
Wow.
voltage, right? So don't touch this stuff. There was also a beacon that went around, and I can remember being in the beam of it, and he grabbed me and pulled me aside and said, "Get away from that," right? Because it was dangerous, because that was the radar beacon or something that was going around. So I actually don't know if it was part of the DO line or if it was part of just the planes, like with the Ministry of Transport, and to do with the airports. To this day, I actually still don't know what it was, but it was really cool because it
Why
was
was
like
it
one.
why was it
Oh, sorry.
dangerous to be why was it dangerous to be in the beam?
Because the radar beams, actually, Chris Beskar talked a bit about this, having a radar in front of the pilot when they fly. So
Oh,
that's exactly like Al's father, when he was shot down because it was a spy plane, and it was an F-86, so it had a radome in the front, and that means there's radar in the front. But that means that the pilot has this radar right in front of him, and radar. If you're in the beam of a radar, it's not good. It depends on
so
how
that
high the energy is.
right.
It's a wicked beam of energy, essentially, that you do
So
not.
that's what that beacon was a radar beam.
Yeah, yeah, it would have had something to do with radar. Yeah, like I say, whether it was a navigation radar setup or whether it was actually a DO line, where they're actually looking for these nuclear missiles coming over, I don't know to this day, and I'm not sure about that. But it was definitely something that you don't want to be in front of the beam,
Yeah,
essentially, and and
exactly.
it's and it's rotating, so you gotta, like, I don't even know why I was in there, actually, because when I think about it, it was so dangerous, right? It's just
Yes.
so dangerous. But that was the case with everything at the airports that we did. Everything that he worked on and touched, they had to work on it live. That's the other thing. And it's all high voltage. In the Air Force, he told me that a guy that he was working with got into the high voltage, and you can't grab the person and pull them away, because if you do that, your muscles will contract
Ooh.
and you won't be able to let go of him.
Oh
So
wow.
you'll get electrocuted as well, right?
Oh my
So
goodness.
unfortunately, this guy, he didn't make it. He
Okay.
died. And I always remember that. So down the road, when I started working on vacuum tube electronics and high voltage, we built a preamp one time, and the guy that was helping me, same thing. He got into the high voltage, even though it was unplugged. It had been unplugged for like a week, but it's
Hmm.
the capacitors that are inside there that still hold the charge, and
Yeah,
it's high voltage, so it's really dangerous.
right.
And what happened was same thing. He started doing the funky chicken, and I was like, oh no. But what I did is I did martial arts back in the day, and I used a judo maneuver. I kicked him away from it so hard that he flew across the room,
Oh
but
my
it didn't
goodness.
but it didn't electrocute me, and it actually saved his life essentially,
Oh
right?
my goodness. That's
So
amazing.
yeah. So then after the Calgary and all that, being young, I guess we have to move along to I guess my schooling. We can get to that point where I took mechanical engineering technology,
Mhm.
uh, and did very well. And after I did that, because my father was in the military kind of drafted me and said, we have some programs for you. But I wanted to go in and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That was what I wanted to do. But my eyesight is no good, or was not to their standards. And at that point, they didn't let anybody have glasses or contacts or anything. You had to have perfect eyesight. You had to be a certain height, which I didn't. I wasn't tall enough. That was the other thing, and
Hmm.
and things. So what ended up happening was the Navy offered me a really special program, and it was fantastic. Actually, um, it was a 7-year contract. The first 3 years, I was going to go to school and be paid to go to university and take an accelerated degree in marine engineering at the University of Halifax was the plan. And then after that, and get paid, and this is like back in 1987, so I would have been paid about $50,000 a year to go to school. And then after that, it was 4 years of service. And at that point, because I would have 2 degrees, then my pay was going to be about double that. So it was a very lucrative contract. And the other thing about it is that it was probably part of Solar Warden, so the SSP program. Although I never, so what ended up happening was I had I guess an epiphany or something, and I realized that this whole program wasn't for me. So before we got into university and everything, I backed out and said, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And it was pretty major, because back then it was, like about $500,000 contract that I sort of
Wow.
walked away from.
Yeah.
And in 87. So now that's,
Yeah.
several million dollars, right?
Right. That's a lot
In
worth a
today,
lot more now. Right.
yeah, in today's dollars. So I always wondered why I did that, what triggered me to do that. So I ended up eventually, I guess, getting into the story a little bit more. I contacted Rebecca Rose, and she did an Akashic reading for me, and we went through to try and figure out why I did it, and what were the ramifications. And so we did that, and she came back and said, it's really good that you did that, because had you not done that, you would have probably got into trouble with the deep state. They would have probably dragged you in and got you involved with whatever. And so that was a really turning point. But in my career, it wasn't very good for my career, essentially, having done that. So as we move along, um, so I guess after school, and coming back out of the military, which was 1987, that's when all of the really cool stuff started for me, I guess, with everything. And I think it's been several decades, because I did want to talk about Paul Laviolette today, and the fact that actually it's not quite today. I think it was on the 28th the very first time that I sent out the 80 pages of study notes that I had from Paul Lavalette on subquantum kinetics
Mhm.
was March 28th of 2021. And so it was 3 years ago, essentially. So it's like the 3 year anniversary of me starting to send these papers out. And the very, very first person that I sent them to was Elena Denon, the French archaeologist. So I sent them to Elena first, and then I sent them to Dr. Sala a little bit after that, probably a couple days after that. I think it was April 1st when Dr. Sala received them. And then I got a message back from Dr. Sala because I was wondering what to do with them, whether I should release them or what should I do with these papers. And the really interesting thing that happened that I just remembered about was when I sent them to Elena, she had her friend Stephen Chow, who was at Area 51. She
Yes,
wrote a book about him later, right?
right.
But at that
So,
point, Stephen Chow died. He
yes,
died very quickly and mysteriously, and
right.
it freaked me out a little bit. So actually, I remember sending an email to Elena saying, "Don't send them to anybody."
Yeah.
And after that, and she said, "Okay, I'll do as you wish." And then I think I contacted Dr. Sal a few days later, and then changed my mind and said, "Okay, let's send them out." But what's really important is that these papers were sent all over the world to scientists and people that I know, and including NASA. They were sent down to NASA. I've got some friends down in NASA. And it's sort of interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about what happened with NASA as we move along in the story, essentially. But I started sending them out, and my idea was, and the papers are about anti-gravity and free energy and Nikola Tesla's technology. So there is a lot there. They're very technical. They're very engineering oriented. So my idea was that the deep state, if we have this knowledge of free energy and anti-gravity out there, there's no way that they can do what they did to us again, essentially, because the knowledge is out there. And once we spread
Right.
it out amongst the world,
Yep.
then people will pick up on it, and they can't control it. So
Yes.
that was the thing. And some people asked me why I didn't type them and put them in the computer. And as you well know, Leja, I'm not I'm not much for computers, and I don't type well, and I'm not I don't spell well and all that kind of stuff. So I decided to just leave them handwritten.
Hmm.
But what happened with them is pretty interesting because they were written in spring of 2018. So they were written 6 years ago, essentially, more than 6 years ago. And it was 3 years ago that I released them. Um, in between time, what I was going to say about the papers was my handwriting, as I wrote them, got worse and worse and worse because of some problems that I had, and I ended up having back surgery. And coming back, then finding these papers, and then they sat there for a while, and I was kind of wondering what to do with them. And then eventually, I contacted Elena Denon and Dr. Sala. But when I did that, and this came from my father, because my father always said, and because he was part of NORAD, he said, if you want results, always go to the top. And so I thought, okay, well, I contacted Paul Lavalette because it's his work essentially, and talked to him about it. And in the process, I said, you, sir, are the second smartest men to set foot on terra firma. Tesla, of course, Tesla being the first. So I nicknamed him Tesla 2.0.
Hmm.
And Paul eventually passed away. So it was kind of nice to have contact with him and stuff as well. So yeah, so I wrote the papers in 2018, and then released them 2021. And so it was Dr. Sala, Elena, and then Paul Lavalette, of course. And then I thought to myself, I should actually send them to Donald Trump, because this is the thing. I've always known about the continuity of government that's going on, even right now. The moment that there was a fence put around the White House, I have a connection to David Wilcock. David Wilcock sent me sections of the war manual that actually followed all of the Q postings that we had. So that's sort of what happened with that. And
What are you referring to about the fence around the White House? What is that
so
referring?
so remember way back when they put a fence around the White House years ago,
That was a long
and
time ago, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the point when David Wilcox sent me the information on the war manual and all the sections. And I can remember reading something that actually, even to this day, chilled me to the bone. And it was the main section. I think it was 18.6 or point 0.7 or something like that. It does follow the Q postings, but it said a foreign adversary on domestic soil.
Hmm.
And this is right out of the war manual. The war manual was written after the Geneva Convention. Believe it or not, everybody that goes to war actually has to follow a manual, according to the Geneva Convention.
Interesting.
So, right. So this war manual was sent to me with the sections in it, and I knew about the continuity of government at that point, which makes Donald Trump the military commander in chief. He has NORAD, which again is the nuclear missile defense of North America, and he has Space Force. Those are the two that he essentially has and in control. So essentially, they've taken the nuclear codes away from Biden, which is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
And they did that a very, very long time ago. So I knew about this continuity of government. So I sent it to Donald Trump. And at this point, I didn't know anything about Stavatti yet. So it was just about subquantum kinetics and free energy. I wish I would have taken screenshots of the actual message that I sent to him,
Mhm.
but I didn't. But it basically said, here's these papers. I want to do this and whatnot. I talked about Paul Violet. And then it was April 16th of 2021, Donald Trump sent me back a message saying that he had received it.
Hmm.
Whether or not he read it or not, I don't know at this point, essentially. So that's yeah. So Donald Trump.
Well, so
Um,
I have another question about that.
sure.
What is the significance of the fence around the White House being built? What does that mean?
Well, at that point, that's when the continuity of government went in, and they essentially opened up the war manual and said, "Here's the section that you guys are." And I don't know. I'm going to say it's the deep state, essentially, but it's probably CPP China connected with the deep state that actually was involved with all of that. I don't know
So
the
they built the
significance.
fence?
Well, the fence was put up probably by the military, right?
Okay.
Yeah, continuity
And
of
why?
government kicks in. Well, because it was a crime scene,
Okay. Now that's important.
literally. Yeah,
That's an
yeah,
important point.
literally. Yeah,
Okay.
it was, yeah,
Okay.
literally
So
a
it was
crime
like,
scene. Yeah,
okay, that's
yeah,
what you mean by the fence. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I get
So,
it now. Okay.
yeah, and everybody kind of remembers the visual pictures of that. I don't know if you remember seeing that, but seeing that fence they
Like the
put up
yellow
around
tape.
there.
Yeah,
It wasn't yellow tape; it was actual fences. From what I remember. Yeah,
really.
they
I don't
fenced it
know.
off because it was a crime scene essentially. And I do know a bunch more about it, but I don't want to get into it right now.
Okay, no,
Um,
I was just curious because I was trying to make sense of it, like what did that
yeah,
mean? Okay,
yeah,
yeah, that
yeah,
makes sense now.
yeah. So then where are we with the story? Yeah, sent the papers out, and they sort of circulated around to a lot of people, because I do have contact with a lot of scientists and people that are in this sort of area or field of advanced physics, you might call it. So I sent them out, and then now what should we talk about? I lost track of things a little bit here. Um, yeah, so yeah, went into the military and then didn't stay, came back out, and then in 1987, what I started doing was I actually built a sound room that is a live end, dead end sound room. So, and you'll understand this as a singer. What it was where you sat and listened from was the liver part of the room, and it had like wood and things like that. But as you moved back towards where the speakers were, the room got deader and deader and deader and deader. So as you like, if you walked in the room and said hello, 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 and walked back to that point, by the time you got back there, you probably would almost not hear yourself. Like it was so deadened back then, and it was essentially a very special sound room. And I did lots of speaker testing and sound research. So essentially, since 1987, I've been doing vacuum tube electronics design and speaker designing, sound research, theoretical physics was always my thing. And so I guess talking about theoretical physics, we can go more into subquantum kinetics, because those papers that I wrote are all about subquantum kinetics. That's what they're all about essentially. And I think the first time that I've got stuff written down with subquantum kinetics is 1994. So it's in essence, I've not been totally involved with it like I am now, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But um, even 30 years ago, subquantum kinetics and Paul Laviolette was on my radar, essentially, right? So that's literally how long it's been with doing that. And I don't know, I just have this thing. I know that you have it as well, where I can look at stuff and know what's true and what's not.
Mhm.
I call it my bullshit filter,
Yeah,
because this is real, this is not.
right.
And with my intuition, like getting out of the Navy, for example, that was my intuition saying you
Yep.
gotta you gotta change and do something different here. With my intuition, I've always sort of ended up in places that have helped me on my path to what we're going to talk, what we're talking about today, essentially, which was electronics and theoretical physics and sound, because those are essentially my specialties, sort of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, with Paul, eventually with Paul, like now I was asked about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago into the Starburst Foundation, which was set up by Paul Laviolette, and that was a real honor. And I'm also in a group called Model G, Vortical Ether Group. So Model G is Model G for gravity,
Hmm.
and vortical is spin, essentially.
Right.
It's spin. Yeah,
A vortice.
vertical motion, vortices, right?
Right.
So spin motion. And so what we're doing is and we've had Brandon on your show, and he's the one that's actually editing the 6th edition of Subquantum Kinetics. And what we're doing is we're trying to take Paul's work and move it forward, essentially. So we're taking subquantum kinetics, and now we're looking at the vortical portion of this. And eventually, once we get experiments out there and get our theories down pat, then eventually that would become part of the new book. Like the 7th edition of subquantum kinetics. And what's really cool too is we're also helping edit it a bit, because I've helped a little bit. Like I think 1 or 2 words I've added to stuff. Because what they do is they read it to you, and it's like, what do you guys think about that? And I'm like, well, it'd be better if you added this or whatever. So we do have a little bit of input, but really it's Brendan and Justin who are actually working on it for the most part.
Right.
And we're going to have a hard copy or a hardcover with color pictures and everything coming
Nice.
up, which is fantastic, because I can remember trying to buy like an early version of Subquantum Kinetics,
Yeah.
and it was $1,800 US they wanted for it, right?
Yeah.
So when
No.
I got in originally when I got in the group, it was really cool because Paul's wife, Mariana, is still alive. So the first meeting I got to meet her,
Mhm.
and I found out that there's like half a dozen hardcover books of the fourth edition still left. And
Mhm.
Mariana had them, so I haven't done it yet, but we've made plans for me to get one of those, so I
Yeah.
have it. And then eventually I'll get the sixth edition, as well,
Right.
so we have that as well too. But honestly, I actually have never read that whole book, Subquantum Kinetics book. Paul wrote another book called Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, and it is very famous. I think Justin said yesterday that there are about 30,000 copies out there, or maybe 40,000, something
Mhm.
like that out there. Paul had a lot of really, really interesting people and friends. One of them is Dr. James Schwartz, who I know as well. And I contacted James and I was talking about Paul's papers. And I sent Paul's papers to James, and James came back to me and said, "Yeah, first of all, I inevitably told him that Paul had passed away, and I didn't know that he was Paul's friend. So he told me that he was Paul's friend, but he also told me that he spent hours talking with Paul while he wrote Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion.
Mhm.
And this is important because James Schwartz the is at this point, I think, the most eminent Tesla expert on the planet. So it's kind of important because there is Tesla technology and in the way that all these things function in there as well. So that's James Schwartz, and yeah, it's kind of a neat connection there because he knew Paul again, and he helped him with subquantum kinetics as well too.
Right.
So that's really interesting as well. And then, so where are we in the story now?
We've gone
we're,
all different directions and
yeah,
sideways
I
and up
know,
and
I
down.
know. So I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to the point of contact with Chris Beskar, because that's sort of what
What we
we're
started with, yeah.
yeah, and I mean that's kind of where I'm trying to get. I'm sort of trying to talk about my history a little bit so that people understand it, because we're
Right.
going to post this show on my channel. This will be the first show that's going to be posted on my new channel
Right.
today or in the near future as well here. So that's also why we're talking about this stuff
An
today.
introduction to, yeah, an introduction to you,
Yeah, essentially,
basically.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
introducing yourself. Yeah.
yeah, because I've done stuff on your show quite a bit and talked about
Mhm.
a lot of my military connections and all of that kind of stuff. But it's
Mhm.
really, and thank you for this is the first time that we've actually just sat here and talked, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Just to sit back and chat about it. So I guess we
My
move
pleasure.
on to the point where um, I guess Stavatti. What happened with Stavatti was very interesting. So
Yeah.
this was in the spring when I started releasing all of my papers and whatnot. And then I ended up getting air ambulanced down to Vancouver for a back surgery, major spinal cord surgery. Got air ambulance back up here, and I actually have a hospital bed. So I was in my hospital bed and I was just chilling out. David Wilcock came on, and I love David Wilcock to death, but he can be very long, very, very
Yes.
long in his things, right? And
He
I was doing
always
a
is
lot,
very long.
yeah, exactly right. And I was doing a lot of sleeping at the time because of the surgery and whatnot, right? So I put him on and I fell asleep, and I think it was
As
like
you do.
yeah, as yeah, right. And I think it was like 3 hours later that
Yeah.
I woke up, and just as I woke up, he started talking about the hover car. And
Mhm.
at that point, um, I'm glad my intuition told me to take a snap, like screenshots. So I started
Yes.
taking screenshots, right?
Yeah.
And the actual image of the hover car that we've shared on your show, and we're going to have on my show eventually, is the only image. Even Stavatti Aerospace hasn't released an image of their hover car.
Right.
So when we get Chris on your show in the near future, we're going to actually show him that picture and say, is this the hover car that you designed in 1987? Is this it? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of cool. Right. So, yeah, so I, he said that they were going to start building hover cars, and I was like, yay. Right. Because
Yeah.
I've known about these technologies for a very long time. I guess one thing that I forgot to say was, uh, back in high school, I met Carmen Miller, and her father is Bill Mueller, is his name.
Mhm.
And Bill actually was in the Hitler Youth, and Bill saw the Nazi flying bell. He
Mhm.
physically saw it, and he actually knew how it worked as well.
Wow.
So back in the 80s, he was big into free energy. He talked about free energy a lot and built a lot of machines and whatnot. And essentially, he mentored me. He mentored me back in the day about free energy. Um, we've talked about charge clusters. Charge clusters are actually the mechanism that makes these things work. And he knew about charge clusters back then, and I knew about them too, but I also knew not to say anything about them because um, it was very, very dangerous to talk about anything like that, especially back in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
So he mentored me. So um, in a lot of ways, I have a very good, you might call it pedigree, to the fact that I was mentored by someone who actually saw this thing work and knew
Right.
about charge clusters. Um, like, especially in America, people, the scientists never talk about charge clusters.
Yeah.
So eventually, and we'll get to charge clusters again when we talk about Stavatti a little bit more, because they're really important in the whole story, right? So yeah, so I heard about these hover cars, and I was like, yay, this is awesome. And then also David Wilcock had said, we we know how these things work, but we don't have a theory. We don't have a theory of anti-gravity. And I'm like, hold on a second. I know the theory. There is a theory of anti-gravity, and I know what it is. It's Paul-Laviolette subquantum kinetics. There is an absolute theory that goes along with that, and it's in the Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion book. You know that
Huh.
I remember reading that book from cover to cover like in one day. Like
Wow.
I was just, this is so awesome, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I knew about this theory of anti-gravity. So what happened? And at that point, I had already started releasing my papers all over the world, kind of thing. So I thought to myself, okay, David Wilcock, I'm going to send you the theory of anti-gravity. I've got it. So I took a hard copy of it, 80 pages, and I had an address for David in California. So I packaged up, sent it off. And in the meantime, we started to learn more about this insider. And at that point, his code name was Ben. That's all we knew him by, was Ben. And he
Mhm.
was an insider with an aerospace company. We didn't know it was Stavatti Aerospace at that point. So we're starting to learn about inevitably what was Chris Beskar, essentially, right? So we're starting to learn about him, and um, I lost my train of thought.
Mhm.
Chris Beskar. So yeah, so David Wilcock, we I packaged this up, sent it off, and then as we learned more about Chris Beskar, something else happened in my life. I was asked by Carmen, because she knows Alexander Frolov. I was asked to edit a book called New Aerospace Technologies, written by Alexander Frolov, who is the former owner of the Faraday Lab in St. Petersburg, Russia.
Wow.
Big time Russian scientist with free energy.
Yeah.
And Carmen's father knew him, and Carmen knew him. At least I think her father knew him. Carmen knew him. So I said, okay, I'll check it out. And as it turns out, this is the best ether physics book that has ever been written, hands down. The Russians were very, very forward in bringing out all the information.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's in the book is there's over 100 years of Russian researchers' science in there as well, Lija. So, like Kozyrev, for example, is in there, and tons of other Russian
Cozy
scientists.
Red
So this,
Hair. Yeah. Is this book available online? Is it a PDF
no,
or anything?
no,
No.
no. Unfortunately, so we're kind of in the middle of trying to edit it, and the war broke out.
Mm.
So then
The current
backed
war
off
with
the
Russia
current war
and
with, yeah,
Ukraine. Right.
exactly.
Okay.
So I what had happened is I actually did edit the book on paper, because you know me, I don't like computers, I don't even like typing. So
Yeah.
I did it on paper, and then the war broke out, and then it was like, oh, okay, well, we better just see what happens here first.
Yeah.
And eventually, probably 6 months ago or something like that, I did contact Alexander Frolov, and I had somebody at that point that was going to help me with the book, get it in the computer, essentially get those edits in the computer and get it done.
Right.
And when I contacted him, he didn't really want to have anything to do with it at this point because of the war,
Yeah.
essentially. So
Understandable.
yeah, understandable. So we kind of agreed to wait till the war's over and revisit it essentially at that point.
Wow.
So
Just
yeah, so that,
another example of how war is a distraction from what really needs to be done and how it keeps us from doing very important things.
yeah, exactly. Because when I talk about that continuity of government is actually in Russia, China, and India, and the US. So there's stuff happening that people just don't understand essentially, right? So Putin is Putin. Well, Elena said that Putin was like a saint essentially. He's a good guy. He's
Mhm.
definitely a good guy. Consider him a white hat, or whatever you want to call him. And Donald Trump is friends with him. It's 11/11 here. It's funny.
That's cool.
And when Donald Trump said that he's going to end all wars in 24 hours, that will happen once he gets back and the deep state gets kind of ousted, because then he'll phone up Putin and everyone and say, okay, shut him down.
Okay, well, this is a
Because,
good thing to say at 11:11 because we're manifesting it now that as you're saying it. So let's make
exactly.
it
Yeah, and
happen.
11/11 is so important because of Remembrance Day and all of that as well, too, right? And,
Yes.
and going back to the Cuban Missile Crisis again, everyone that was in there, and people, I don't know if anybody died, but I think there could have been people in the Bay of Pigs.
Mhm.
Everybody's a hero because we came so close to nuclear destruction. Probably the
Yeah.
closest we've ever been, actually, right?
And
Yeah.
and the star beings were the ones who kept us from blowing ourselves up by,
Yes. Yeah.
like going to the warheads and
Yeah. Yeah.
deactivating them.
Yes. And that's an interesting thing because when we talked a little bit with Chris about that, there is a
Mm.
way to use charge clusters to deradiate nuclear waste, right?
Yes.
Um, and I guess when we talk about charge clusters, I do want to bring up a couple points that are really valid. One of them is we'll get into Ken Shoulders a little bit more when we talk more about Stavatti, but Ken Shoulders was Chris Beskar's business partner, and he was the one working on charge clusters, or EVOs, exotic vacuum objects is another name. There's several other names.
That's yes.
Um, but what Chris told us was that he thought that Ken's cancer was caused by those charge clusters.
Mhm.
So it's very dangerous. This work is very dangerous. It's
Mhm.
high voltage for one thing, which is ultra dangerous, but there's other things going on here as well. And with the Nazi Flying Bell, for example, um, if they brought anything organic near it, it quickly turned to like a gray mush.
Right. It
Plants,
it
anything, right?
actually aged things, right? It aged
So
it
you're so correct.
prematurely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're so correct, because most people actually say that it was a radioactive thing, and I'm like, no, it wasn't. It wasn't that. You're absolutely right. It aged things ultra fast. So, and it
Yeah.
killed people. apparently there were people that died as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that
eventually
makes
we're going to
sense.
have,
It would age things too fast. It would kill people because they would,
yep,
just go to their death,
yeah.
right?
If they came too close to it and got it,
Yeah,
into the zone or whatever, they would just turn to gray mush, and that's it. They're gone essentially, right?
yeah,
And of course, Bill Mueller would have saw this stuff.
yeah,
He would have
right.
witnessed this. So eventually, we're gonna have Carmen on my show, and I know that we're trying to get her on your show as well, because the world needs to understand and know about. Like she's the person that probably knows the most about this because it's her father, right? And we need to get her talking a little bit more about it, and so the world understands what it was. But you're right, with the flying bell, it was actually true anti-gravity, where it was counter-rotating torsional fields that
Mhm.
cause a lift or an anti-gravity effect. And but they had it turned up too much.
Ah,
So that's what caused all this weird stuff, and all the time things that happened when they had it
oh,
cranked up
right,
too much, right? They
right.
didn't really know what they were doing. They were just
Is
experimenting with it all,
is
right?
there a way to make it so that you age regress instead of it if you change the direction?
That's a very valid point, because we know that we can do these things. Um, that's a that's a good that's something I'll have to think about. I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay. Yeah.
But for sure, if you can do something in one direction, you can actually reverse it.
Yeah, just
But
reverse the directions. I mean, they have to be reversed opposite directions to make it happen. But I mean, just do it the other way,
yeah,
and then it would be the age regression instead of
yeah, you're talking about negative entropy, essentially,
yeah,
is what you're talking about,
yeah.
right?
Neg
Yeah,
entropy. Yes.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, so with the bell, so where are we with the story now?
I know we keep getting
Yeah,
distracted, but these are good
side.
distractions.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
We could talk about Stavatti. We could talk about how
yeah.
um
Let's go back to
get into that.
Stavatti. Yeah, because so what it was, so I took these shots of the hover car, and then David said, we don't have a theory of anti-gravity. I said, yeah, I got it. I have it printed out, as a matter of fact, sitting right here. These papers I wrote are it, from subquantum kinetics viewpoint, Paul Laviolette. So I packaged everything up, the 80 pages, and wrote David a note, threw it in there, sent it off to California. And in the meantime, we find out about Ben, who eventually is Chris Beskar. And then on October 30th of 2021, and this is really funny because um, this is the first Zoom call I've ever had in my life,
Right.
literally, because my brother actually I had to call my brother and ask him how to get Zoom in my phone to get the app, right? And,
Yeah.
right. And before that, I didn't have, I had like, I didn't have Wi-Fi. I had cellular data, and it was
Mm,
horrible. Like I couldn't even download pictures. Like, it was just ridiculous, right? So I didn't have access to all of that stuff.
yeah.
So I asked my brother. We loaded up the Zoom thing, and I can remember being so nervous because, well, I was actually on your podcast first time ever,
Yeah.
with the hovercar presentation and electrogravitics. So that's the first time I've ever done a podcast, other than university live presentations that I did, on the
Right.
same stuff, right? Yeah. So I was really, really nervous, but because I thought I was going to have to talk to David Wilcock, but I didn't. We just listened, and I don't know how many people were on the call. There's probably lots. I don't
Yeah.
know how many people you can have as a Zoom call.
A lot. You can have a
A
lot.
lot. Yeah, a lot, right? So we just listened, and I took a screenshot of it, which we've shown on your show a couple times. So David Wilcock basically blew my mind at that point, because he said, I bought Stavatti Aerospace, and that's where we learned about Stavatti Aerospace, because we knew it was an aerospace company, but we didn't know who, right? I bought
Mhm.
Stavatti Aerospace to produce hover cars using anti-gravity technology that was
Mhm.
developed with the Pius patents, which we'll talk a little bit about maybe. Um, and this is all kind of connected to Chris Beskar because Chris Beskar and David Wilcock are business partners.
Yes.
And we can go back
David
a
is
little.
on the chairman
Yeah,
of the is the chairman of the board. Yeah. Right.
yeah, right. Yeah, now David Wilcock is the advanced. He's yeah, a part of the board, but he's the advanced director, the director of advanced technologies. That's what he is.
That's
Yeah,
his
and
title. Okay.
he's also on the board.
Right.
I will say that I know of other people that are on the board. I'm not
Mhm.
going to say who they are, but I will say that a lot of people that came out of Lockheed Skunk Works and Lockheed
Are on the board.
are working with Stavatti. Or not. There is somebody on the board, but they're working with Stavatti. So
Okay.
there's a lot more going on, than we know of, essentially, right?
Right.
So yeah. So again, lost track. Where are
But
we?
you're talking about how you found out about Chris being part of
Oh,
Stavatti and
yeah, right. Chris. So yeah, Chris Beskar. So Chris Beskar, right? So by this time, they told us they bought this, or they actually they bought it, but it was an Army reserve base, so it was a military base, and we'll talk a little bit more about that whole thing in a second here. So they bought it, and by that point, I had an address for Niagara Falls, New York, for the Stavatti, which is their prototyping location, is what it's called now, I think. And at the time, the code name was Snapper.
mm,
The whole facility's code name was Snapper,
yeah,
and Chris Beskar's thing was Ben, right?
yeah.
So yeah, so um, what happens is David Wilcock moved from California, so my package got sent back, and by this time I was asked to do New Aerospace Technologies, so I had printed off a hard copy of it, and I grabbed an envelope. I didn't even open the other envelope up. I just took that envelope that had Paul's papers in it, my note to David Wilcock, threw it in there, found a bigger envelope, wrote a note to Chris Beskar this time because now I know who he is,
Mm,
and added a hard copy of New Aerospace Technologies, sealed it up, and sent it to Niagara Falls, New York. So
mm.
Chris ended up having a hard copy of both there. But we'll have to ask him because I'm not sure that he actually got it or not, or
Yeah.
where it ended
That would
up.
be
So
nice to find out. Yes, if he has it.
yeah,
He ever
and
got it.
so then what happened was um, the very next day, which was Halloween, it was October 31st of 2021. I went on to David Wilcock's forum and I posted the theory of anti-gravity according to subquantum kinetics and Paul Laviolette, and I added a few things in there of myself. But at the end, I wrote, I sent you an envelope about a month ago, and that's the envelope that I'm talking about. The original one that I sent to David Wilcock, right, that got sent back, and then
Yeah.
I forwarded up off to Chris Beskar, right. So now we know about Chris Beskar, right? So Chris Beskar was originally introduced to me by David Wilcock on video. I have hours and hours and hours and hours of David Wilcock and Chris Beskar talking about Stavatti Aerospace, their plans, physics, consciousness. It just on and on and on. It's
This was on a
fantastic.
Zoom call, right? That they were having. What call was this that you have a video of?
No, this is all from, and this is a good point, just bring up actually. In the very, very beginning, Stavatti Aerospace was crowdfunded.
Okay.
Okay, so I was one of the initial investors or whatever you want to call it that did that, right?
Okay.
But David Wilcock and still has, and I want to absolutely tell everyone that they should go and do this. David Wilcock has something called thedisclosure.com,
Mhm.
and that's where I posted on his forum. But what it is there's 10 hours of David Wilcock and Chris Beskar talking about Stavatti Aerospace. So these videos
On that
um,
on that website.
on that website, but
Okay.
it's still crowdfunded. So you also get David Wilcock's all of his new books, the Michael Prophecies and everything else in the package, and it's $333 US.
Okay.
So it's kind of expensive, but anybody that is really wants to know about Stavatti Aerospace,
Mhm.
spend the money, dive in. You're going to see stuff that will just blow your mind, essentially. Because what they talk about there, it's a lot of the stuff I can't talk about on YouTube, for
Right.
example, right?
Right.
Because they're Stavatti is also doing military stuff. Because we'll talk a little bit more about Chris Beskar, and all that. So yeah, everybody needs to check out the disclosure if you're really interested. Originally, I can remember 25 hours that I had and watched. There's only 10 now. So I actually ended up with probably 15 or almost double or even more than double of what's actually on there now. And there's a
Wow.
lot of things that I took screenshots of.
Hmm.
And one of them is very cool because um, what happened was David Wilcock, when he bought Stavatti Aerospace in October of 2020. So now what happened was October 30th of 2021 is when I had the Zoom call with David Wilcock and he told us he bought it. But he actually bought it a year before that. So there was some kind of clause in the military part of it that said you can't release anything for a year, essentially.
Okay.
So that's why it goes back to October of 2020.
Mhm.
October of 2020, Donald Trump is still president. This is important because I have a screenshot that we should have shared. We might be able to share later. I don't know, or I'll share it later on later shows. And we have shown it on your show as well. It's
Yeah.
a screenshot of David Wilcock. He's filming his slippers,
Yeah,
and his
we've shown that.
slippers, yeah,
Yep.
say Trump on them, right?
Yeah.
And he's in a Trump hotel, and
Mhm.
he says, I have not yet met with 45, which is 45 is Donald Trump, right? 45th president. I've not met yet with 45, but I've met everyone else. So he's met everyone else, and then he goes off to this meeting with Trump. So, and I've always known about this, right? Right from the beginning. So it was really cool when we had Chris on, and I asked him about it on the last show of yours, and he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Chris, were you at that meeting with Trump?" And he said, "Yes, I was." And I said, "I thought you were there because he's the CEO of Stavatti Aerospace,
Yeah.
and David and him are the ones that are owners and running this thing." So Chris always has had a security clearance, let's just say, right, because of the aerospace and all of the military stuff that he does. And at
Mhm.
that point, David Wilcock, when he bought Stavatti Aerospace, he had to get a military clearance now,
Right.
right? That's and I knew that from before, and just because of my all my friends and family are all military, essentially, like everyone is. My father was, so I knew that fact that that was the case, that that was the military thing. So then, as we move along, yeah, Stavatti. We should talk a little bit about Chris Beskar because um, I think it was in his 8th grade. Chris won a drawing contest for the best aircraft design or whatever. So that at that point, I believe that he contacted the Air Force himself. We might ask him actually when we get him on the show again about that. Talk a little bit more about that. And then at that point, because I did the math the other day when Chris told us how old he was, because he told us that the hover car was designed in 1987. And I did the math, and I think that hover car would have been one of these designs right around that time when he was like in grade 8.
Yeah, he was in eighth grade. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Which would have
then
been, he would have been about 13 or 14 years old.
exactly right. Yeah. So, and I mean, that's truly amazing. So we're going to have to ask him if that, is the actual one of the things he worked on. And I think it is back then, essentially. So yeah, so with David and Chris, I knew that they both had these clearances, and I've signed a lot of non-disclosures throughout my lifetime. In fact, 6 inches thick of them with all the. So every time you work on a technology as a technologist, they want you not talking about it or working with anybody else about it because you can steal stuff, right? Or whatever.
Yeah, as a technician.
So yeah, so I always did that, but I knew that now I don't have one. So that's why I'm bringing you guys the theory of anti-gravity according to subquantum kinetics. It's not my theory. I'm just the guy delivering it. So the next day, I posted that on David Wilcock's forum, and oddly enough, it ended up number 51, which is really, really strange because when we start talking about Chris Beskar and how Stavatti came to be, David Wilcock had an insider at Area 51 for a long time, like for a decade or something, and his name was Pete Peterson. And I've said in the past that Pete Peterson was the grandson of Nikola Tesla's lab assistant. Chris didn't verify that, but that information came straight from David Wilcock. So, I'll go with that. And so Pete Peterson at Area 51 was known as Doctor Who. I think, yeah, Doctor Who, because he talked a lot about the show, right? Um,
Yeah.
with Doctor Who in it, right? Pete Peterson was probably the most brilliant man that was ever at Area 51. And he mentored another super brilliant person, Chris Beskar. So Chris Beskar was mentored by Pete Peterson at Area 51. And what happened was Pete Peterson had designed the brain of a real Terminator. It was a real Terminator. And he had that DARPA built eventually. And he had a real guilt on his conscience about this. So one day he decided to introduce Chris Beskar, who he mentored, to David Wilcock. And that's how Stavatti sort of came to be. Chris and David became friends, and I think over the course of about 12 years or something, I think it was, to the point where David actually bought Stavatti October of 2020, essentially, right? So, so then, yeah, so I posted the theory of anti-gravity on there. And then getting back to Chris, how I got in contact with him was I I had a lot of contact information for Stavatti all over the place. And I phoned Niagara Falls, New York, and talked to Dr. Depak. And Dr. Depak was the chief scientist for Stavatti Aerospace. And I talked to him for about half an hour. We had a really awesome conversation. And then as I was driving back to town, it's probably like a half an hour drive or something. Obviously, Dr. Depak had got a hold of Chris Beskar, and Chris texted me and said, "Hi, this is Chris Beskar." So that's essentially how I ended up getting in contact with Chris Beskar, and that was February 18th of 2023 is when that happened, right? So that's and then I've had contact with him all along. So eventually, like for the last couple of months, we were going back and forth trying to get him on your show. He's a really busy guy. So
Yeah.
we ended up getting him on, not camera, but he was driving, right?
Yeah. He was
Yeah.
driving in a snowstorm from
Yes.
I think it was New
New.
Mexico to Texas. And it's
Yes.
like, I mean, he didn't even have to do this. He was just such a nice guy
I
to
know, right?
even like offer to still do it anyway.
Yeah.
And we took him up on it. And I mean, it was sketchy coverage here and there where he would drop in and out during
Yeah.
the Zoom call. But we managed to get him on the show, and he was very, very kind and very uh patient with us.
Yeah, yeah,
And he's just such a good person, and with such a good heart. Um, I'm really looking forward to having him back on again, and this time on camera where maybe we'll have a hopefully better connection.
yeah,
Uh, you know, whatever we're going to be using, and he'll be able to really talk to us and have a good conversation. So, and he's offered to do that. He was
yeah,
so nice about it. Like, oh yeah, I'll come. Even before he agreed to come on, just you know, audio only, he said, I will come back on and do a camera version
yeah,
of it with you as well. Like
yeah.
he offered that with it. So that was really very kind of him, very generous. And so we're looking forward to within the next few weeks. Um,
Yeah, hopefully,
uh,
yeah. Hopefully it should be this month sometime, hopefully.
because we've thrown around a few dates and it looked like those were good for him. So he,
Yeah.
we'll just see what happens. But yeah, it's looking good and really looking forward to being able to talk to him again.
Yeah, he is so kind and such a genuine person. Um,
Yes,
that's yeah, very down to earth
you're down to
and
earth. Yeah,
because we have to consider that I said this to the Paul Lavalette group that I'm in. I said that Chris Beskar is the most brilliant physicist on the planet, especially
right,
since Paul Lavalette passed away,
right.
because the combination of those two actually gives you all that you need for anti-gravity and
Well,
all
yeah,
these
and the
technologies.
hover car is the proof of that. So yeah,
Exactly. And what's really cool and what blew my mind a little bit was when Chris said that there was four different ways that they could fly that thing, the hover
wow,
car, and
yeah,
he had three that were already operational.
yeah,
I knew of two, like one for sure, and possibly two, but not three and four. That
yeah.
really blew my mind, right? That
That's
was,
amazing.
yeah,
The
very,
stuff that
very
he just
cool.
knows, just he just knows it. It's
Yeah,
just, it's amazing. So the fact that he is just so cavalier about it all and very, yeah, very like, hey, hi, how are you? And then what was it that he said? If you're interested in having me, if you're interested in having me
we
back
we
on,
went back and forth a bunch of times, and I threw some dates out there, and he reacted to one or two, and then didn't react for quite a long time because we're trying to figure stuff out. And then he sent the thing back saying, we can probably do it at this date if you are still interested. And I'm like, really?
if you're
Still
still
interested? Are you
interested.
kidding me? Yes, Chris, we're so interested. And of course, I'm going to send this to him probably today. So just thanks again for everything,
Yeah,
Chris.
yeah.
And I also
Thank
want to
you.
say
Thank you.
thank you for all of the knowledge that David Wilcock and Chris Beskar have brought, because all of the slides that I've used on your show and on your Patreon, which we need to mention because there's lots of cool stuff on Patreon, they're all from Stavatti Aerospace. They're all from David Wilcock and Chris Beskar,
Yes.
literally, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very, very, very grateful to have a connection with both of them, as a matter of fact. And
Which we
you
can
know,
also say that we have the first presentation of the hover car on my Patreon. Um, the one and
yeah,
only right now. I'm sure that he'll have something out there soon. But for now, it's the only one out there, and it's only on my Patreon on
yeah,
Potentials Podcast at Patreon,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Just check it out. It's so awesome, and it's really inexpensive. Her Patreon is like what, $5 a month or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's so totally worth it because a lot of the charge cluster and a lot of the technology that makes these things work, we can't talk about on YouTube.
yeah,
Um, that's why it's on her Patreon channel. So highly
right.
recommend everyone
So
going there.
YouTube
And
doesn't yank it down.
yeah,
And just also thank you to Chris for allowing us to put that out there, to even just, you know, have
yeah,
this information out there. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
means a lot.
exactly.
Yeah.
Very, very, very grateful for all the information, continually getting as well too, because there's other things that are in the works as well at Stavatti. The it will change. Like the conversation that I had with Dr. Depak, at one point I said to him, so this is going to change everything. And he went, yes. I was like, yeah, it is. I'll
Okay.
talk a little bit about the pious patents because this all is connected to it a little bit.
Yeah.
I've said in the past that the pious patents are the greatest release of technology in the history of mankind. And there's hands down no question about it because it's got to do with charge clusters. But having said that, the military always does something here while they're really doing what's they're really doing over here somewhere
Right.
else.
Right.
So what's really happening is highest patents are this incredible information coming out, but Stavatti Aerospace and Chris's connection with Ken Shoulders, who was his business partner before Ken passed away, the technology is really coming out of what these guys are working on in the Ken Shoulders patents.
Yeah.
So all of this charge clusters and all this incredible things that they're going to do with them are actually coming out not of the pious patents, they're actually coming out of Chris Beskar, essentially, and Stavatti, and again Ken Shoulders, right? So Ken is really important to talk about as well because he was good friends with John Hutchison,
I was just going to say
and yeah,
that.
right, and John Hutchison and Carmen were friends, so that's kind of my connection to those guys. So there's a very close connection between me and Carmen to Chris Beskar and John Hutchison. But what's really cool was Carmen. Originally, I thought that she sent Mastering Getting into Space. She sent it to me, but I thought she got it from Alexander Frolov because
Mm.
it talks about the Russian hover car program and
Oh,
anti-gravity that the Russians are working on.
wow.
So what happened was she sent it to me. I thought it came from Alexander Frolov, but I recently asked her about it, and she said no, it didn't. It was my research. I found it, and then I sent it to you. So I watched it, and I was like, "Holy crap!"
Wait, so this
The
is
Rush.
Carmen's research?
Yeah, it was Carmen's research that found Mastering Getting into Space.
Oh, wow.
So she was the one that actually found it. Then she sent it to me. I watched it, and I'm telling you, like 5 minutes after I watched it, I immediately sent it to Chris Beskar because
Yeah.
I can text him. I've got all his contact stuff, right? So I sent it to him and I said, check this out. I said, essentially, the Russians are ahead of you guys. They already have a movie out. They're talking about how this stuff works.
You sent
Um,
that to me, right?
yeah, recently I sent it to you and I asked you to watch it because it is
Yeah,
startling. It's
I did.
very, yeah. And
Yeah.
and they do talk about the Russian hover car program, right? So I
Yes, they
sent
did.
it to Chris Beskar and I said, you guys should do something. You guys need to do something about this, right? Because the Russians are beating you guys, like, and hands down here, right? So what's really cool is on the last show with us, Chris told us about the new movie coming out called Levitation,
Yes.
which David Wilcock is producing. Um, Chris was interviewed a long time ago. He told us the date on your show when it happened, when he was interviewed for that. But he also told us that John Hutchison is going to be on the show as well, and he was interviewed. And this is
Yes.
getting really exciting now
Yeah.
because John Hutchison, Chris Beskar, Ken Shoulders,
Yeah.
this is the nuclear core of charge clusters,
Yeah.
literally.
They're the Beatles of charge clusters.
Yeah,
They're literally,
absolutely.
they are. Yeah.
Absolutely right. And again, charge clusters. Ken Shoulders has said in the past, and we've had this on your show. I think it was in the Patreon channel. Ken Shoulders says that charge clusters are the clutch that engages the ether. So when you drive Legia, you let out the clutch, and that lets the power transfer to the wheels, and off you go.
Right.
It's the same thing with charge clusters. They're what actually does the work that
Yeah.
connects to the ether and lets us have free energy, lets us have anti gravity, Let's just
Yeah.
have all these things that the deep state absolutely does not want us to know about, right?
It's the enabler. It's the enabler. It enables
Yep,
everything to happen.
yep,
Yeah.
it is. Now, I think I might have said this earlier. Very important to know that Chris told us that Ken, he thought, probably passed away of cancer because of working with these charge clusters.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
when people are doing research, I'm just saying, I'll talk about this stuff, but you have to realize how dangerous it is.
Yeah. If you're going
And
to play around with it, definitely be very careful. Take the
you need,
precautions that you need to take.
yeah, you need to know what you're doing. Like to start off, you have to be a high voltage expert. That's the first requisition, and that not too many people are. Like I am, Chris is, other people are, but there aren't very many of us. So that's one prerequisite. But then there's other stuff going on with those charge clusters that, because they can travel. That's the thing, right? They can
Yeah.
travel, and the voltages and everything that are involved with all of this stuff is lethal. That's the other thing, right? So,
Right.
and that is something we're going to have to talk to Chris about with the hover car. How are they actually going to make it safe
Right.
so that? And he talked about that. He said this is what we need to do, and we need to make sure that it is safe before it's out there
Before
with all the people
before
in the
you put it
public
into production. Yes. Right.
public domain and stuff, right? So
Right.
yeah, and yeah, so it's really so how did I become an electrogravitics expert and connection with Chris Beskar? It's just intuition and perfect timing and people coming into your life at certain
Yeah.
points. You
Divine
know,
time for
divine
sure.
timing, synchronicities.
Yeah.
A good synchronicity is yours and ours.
Yeah.
Um, you know, everything came along at just the right time to do a presentation on the hover car.
Yes.
And also, I don't know if I said this, that picture that we have is the only one. There,
Hmm.
even Stavatti hasn't released a picture of it, so it's
Correct.
kind of special. And we're going to actually show that picture to Chris on the next show and ask him, "Is this what you designed in 1987 when you were 13 years old?"
Yeah.
Chris Beskar, this came from Chris and David. By the age of 23, he had
Hmm.
accomplished everything in life. What does that mean? That means that from the age of 13 to 23, that's 10 years, a decade. Inside of that decade, um, anti-gravity, free energy, charge clusters, that he'd done it by that point. Absolutely incredible. And that's why, like I still say, he's the most brilliant physicist out there. And I did flatter him also with our first hover car presentation. Uh, he sent a text back to me and said, "I'm flattered." And I think that's also why we got him on the show, is because I
Well,
did.
he's just so humble. I mean, how is he flattered? We're the ones that are flattered.
I know
You
exactly.
know?
I know. I think the reason why he was flattered was the research that I did, because I dug into it, Stavatti, for a whole year. Because when David Wilcock said he's the premier space or builder of spacecraft in the world, I was like, huh? What? Like that's a statement, right? So
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. So I did a lot of research and came back and went, yes, that is true. That's a true statement.
Correct.
Correct statement. With
Marvelous.
the patents that they have on double hull technology, spacecraft and aircraft, um, when Chris says that he'd like to have his own spacecraft up there, or even a fleet of them, because I've heard him say that a couple times,
Yeah.
um, I'm just saying that's super cool, and I wish I had that too, Chris. I wish I
Yeah.
had my own starship, right? Wouldn't
Hint,
that be
hint.
awesome?
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
think yeah, I think we all want that.
yeah.
We all want to be able to do that.
Uh,
Um,
Um, well, except
but
for Andrea, this is a funny
Andrea
thing because
doesn't want to do, she wouldn't mind riding on it. I don't think she wants to fly it
yeah,
though.
because I told her, I said I had a premonition that I told you this, that Chris Beskar flew up a hover car up to where I am, and then I flew it back. He's teaching me how to fly it, flew him
Mhm.
home, and then I came and got you. And then I went to get Andrea, but when I asked Andrea, she said, "I'm not getting in that thing. No way."
Oh, oh, right, right, right. Because it's an earth craft. Right, right. It's a man-made craft. Right. I forgot
Exactly.
about that.
She
I
doesn't she
forgot.
doesn't even like airplanes, right? And I'm like, really?
True. True.
What?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, we're not going to come and get you then, but I think we'll come and we'll go grab Kat, your other friend
Yeah.
Kat, who
Yeah.
yeah, she would love that. And I know that she'd love to meet Chris Beskar at some
Oh
point
yeah.
too,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're definitely picking up Cat.
yeah. So I do want to say that we're going to get Chris on your show first, and then I am going to ask him probably on your show off camera. I'm going to ask him if he will come on my show.
Well, now you're
And
on camera asking him because he's going to watch this.
exactly, yeah, exactly,
So
right. So
what's the
yeah,
point of being off
yeah,
camera?
that's off
Do I have
camera.
to
Well,
edit this now, Ed?
I'll
Come on.
remind him again.
You know I
But
don't like to edit. Ah, I keep
exactly,
everything organic. I don't
yeah,
edit my
yeah, I know,
shows, just so you know that. Just so you
yeah,
people, anybody watching, nothing gets edited out.
yeah. We in full disclosure, we have done I think a show or two where we've
Oh, where
had
we didn't show the show at
malfunctions.
all. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
did
we
that.
had malfunctions and we actually stopped and we actually did recorded the whole thing over again. I think we've done it a
Yeah,
couple times.
yeah. We
Yeah,
one time we had a malfunction, and another time, you didn't like the way it turned out, so I didn't post it. So yeah,
that's
so
right.
produce those. But as far as me putting out anything, I always just do it exactly the way it's recorded, and I don't
Yeah.
edit anything we say. Whatever we say, it's just like, oh well, it's out
Yeah,
there now. So
yeah,
we
exactly.
kind of have to we have to censor ourselves sometimes so
Yeah,
we don't put anything out there we shouldn't yet.
ye-
But we're on
yeah,
YouTube here. So on
yeah,
the Patreon
exactly.
channel, there's no censorship. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And again, everyone
it
go
is what
check
it
out
is.
our Patreon channel because that's where the really juicy information is about
Just quantum
anti-gravity,
kinetics, yeah.
and
Um
everything, right?
and the wing
And we're
makers.
gonna have more. We plan on having a lot more. We're doing the wing makers.
Yep.
We're gonna
We're up
have.
to we're up to episode 3 and we're gonna have 6. So
Yep,
we have 3 more to do, and those will be coming up soon. Those are the next ones we're going to be
yep,
filming. And
yep.
then we're going to do the Emerald
Thoth.
Tablet of Thoth,
Yep, yep.
and
And those are and that's five.
film
I think
more.
that's 5 shows.
Right,
That one. Yep.
right.
And then
So
we
we've got a
have.
lot.
Yeah, we've got a lot of them. There's another one that I want to talk about is David Hudson, and it's on modern alchemy and superconductivity.
Ah, that's going to be
That's going to be a really
fascinating.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
There's
Looking
one
forward.
on Thoth on physics,
Ah,
on just on physics.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I do want to say that later down the road, it's going to be much later. And I've asked you and possibly Kat because she hasn't 100% confirmed, but we're going to also do the Cedars on my show. We're just going to read from it and talk about it.
Right.
I'm not going to change anything because
No.
Elena, of course, Elena was my very first contact of everyone, and she's the one that I actually sent those papers to originally. And
Hmm.
Elena, yeah, I have deep respect for Elena, and I do want to say with Elena again, another person that I've learned tremendous amounts from, just tremendous amounts from. Everybody should check out her books, and she's the real deal, guys. Yeah, and down the road on my show, we'll talk more about her and those things. And the one last thing I wanted to bring up was Danny Henderson. Danny Henderson is Elena's best friend, and Danny is also the one that does GISIC, and which is Galactical Spiritual Informers Conference, I think.
Conference.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Galactic
Spiritual Informers
Spiritual Informers Conference. Yes.
Connection. Isn't it connection or conference? I
Or
can't
maybe
remember.
disconnection. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. Sorry, Danny.
Yeah.
But anyways, uh, very recently, I've had contact with Elena and Danny for quite a long time, and recently Danny and I chatted back and forth, and she was really the one that sort of gave me or egged me on or gave me the courage and you have as well, of course.
And
Um,
encouragement. Yeah.
yeah, encouragement to do technology envoy. So thank you, Danny, for that. Because yeah,
Well,
she basically said, let it out there, let all your
right.
information out there, right?
We're we're all a team and we're all in this together to try to get this information out there that needs to be out there. That's why
Yeah,
we're doing this. We're trying to escalate ascension. We're trying to put everything on the fast track to get it to make these technologies and everything more available to people.
yeah,
Because it's been way too long that they've kept this under wraps. For so many years, we could have been already living a much better life and a much more
yeah,
peaceful, harmonious existence. Um,
absolutely.
and it's going to happen, but we need to make it happen. And
Yeah,
we have to we have to put our energy into it, and our
very,
intent, and we have to feed it in order to make it happen faster. And that's
yeah,
what this is all about, because there is the potential for this to happen faster, and that's why we're doing this.
yeah, exactly. Because we're using our consciousness essentially to focus our intention,
Yes.
our intent, or dhamma. Dhamma is actually how, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's
Um, right?
collective. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
collective.
exactly. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, because that's what it is. And once the election is over and Trump comes back, because I'm just going to say he's going to come back for sure, because essentially what is truly happening is he's coming out of continuity of government.
Mhm.
So he's still in charge of certain stuff, like the important stuff, like I was saying, NORAD and Space Force, and
Right.
of course Space Force. I don't know if I've talked about it before, but right behind me on the wall here, uh,
Yep.
it it was right around the time that Stavatti, I did the posting of the anti-gravity and everything with Stavatti. Somebody that's still an active member of the military, a very high active member of the military, sent me this honorary Space Force emblem, which is so cool. It
Which
was,
you sent me.
yeah, and we've used it on
Yes.
your show a bunch of
Yes.
times, right?
Right.
And I want to say that it really, really gave me a lot of encouragement as well, tremendous encouragement to say, here it is, and this is what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. And this active member that sent this to me, once he retires, he's a pilot. Once he retires, he's got something to talk about on the show. He's going to come on the show and talk about it. I also have, I
Awesome.
showed you a list yesterday of 23 possible guests
Yes.
that we're going to try and get on my show and your show as well. And we should also talk about Kat's show a little bit, because eventually, once she gets it going, all three of us will probably share stuff and be on each other's
Oh,
shows
absolutely. Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So I kind of just want to say thank you to her as well, because it was actually Kat that I originally called it Starseed Envoy.
Yeah.
And she said, "What are you going to do with this channel?" And I told her, and she said, "No, that's the wrong name."
Yeah.
So then we came up with Technology Envoy, and down the road, Envoy. There's a special meaning for Envoy. Envoy means that I'm bringing you this technology, but down the road, once we do the seeders and get into that stuff, we're going to reveal what Envoy actually truly means, and it's something quite special to both you and I and Kat, and I would even
Well,
say David Wilcock and Chris Beskar and the whole gang,
I mean,
right?
Elena was the one who sort of brought it to the forefront, right? So,
Yep, yep,
yeah.
yep. So we'll talk more about all of that down the road. And yeah, again, I've Elena. Oh, that's the other thing we didn't talk about. I was on the radio show. Frank Chili, our friend, awesome Frank. He asked me on the radio show January 13th of 2023, and it was the same radio show that William Tompkins had been on over 20 times. John Hutchison was on the show. Paul LaViolette was on the show, which
This is
Frank
the
didn't
Joe
know about
Rice show.
those.
Yeah,
yeah, Frank's show, right? The Jeff Rent's radio show.
the
So
difference
that,
radio.
yeah, so that was a real honor because Frank is the executive producer of the Jeff Rent's radio show. And what I was going to say about that was I was trying to get Elena to listen to it live, but she was Frank sprung it on me. He asked me the night before, and I did the radio show the next day, so it was really fast. So Elena couldn't listen that night, so we went back and forth, and we were going to try and change the show so that Elena could listen live, but it was not fair to Frank to cancel because I'd already said he was, was going to do it. So we went
Yeah.
back and forth and stuff. And in the end, though, she thanked me because I talked about Elena on the show. I talked about subquantum kinetics. I talked about Stavatti. I talked about a lot of things on there as well. So people should go check it out if they get a chance. And again, thank you, Legia. It's just been so wonderful. I don't know if you have any more questions for me about the
No, I think we've
process. And
covered quite a lot. I mean,
yeah,
it's been like maybe an hour and a half this time, or
okay,
maybe a
yeah, it's
little
time
more.
to wrap it up.
Yes.
Yeah,
But yes, it's been fascinating, and thank you for sharing your story with us and your whole all of your experiences, and how you got to this point and where you are now, and what you're aiming for in the future, what your goals are. So,
yeah,
which is
yes,
all of our we're kind of all coming together with the same kind of goals. We all want the same thing. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
so,
And we're doing this to so people realize that there is hope, true hope for the future.
right.
Um, this is going to change everything. And they're going to take energy out of the equation as well. And that's a huge thing as well
We're
there
paying
too.
for energy, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
going to be, that's the thing. We're not going to be paying to live on this planet anymore, which we're the only creatures, and this has been said so many times, but it's worth repeating. We're the only creatures on the planet that pay to live on the planet, which is
truth
ridiculous.
there.
So
Yeah,
why are we doing it? Why are we
yeah,
allowing it to continue? So we have
yeah.
to speak up and say, no, no, we're not doing this anymore. And
Um,
we know we have the knowledge, we have the technology,
yeah, yeah,
and we
exactly.
can do it.
Yeah,
We know how to now have free energy. So let's
yeah.
go for it. Let's do it.
Chris
And
Beskar has said, sorry, Chris Beskar has said twice in the past that I've heard him say that we will have more energy in the future than we know what to do with.
right.
An excess of energy, right?
Yes.
And it has a
And
lot
that's
to
not a bad,
do. No, that's amazing, right? Yeah,
yeah,
and it has a lot to do with what was released through the pious patents again. Some of the technologies, and we talk about that stuff on your Patreon channel a lot. So
yeah,
again, everyone should go check out Legia's Patreon and then my new show. uh,
yeah.
I don't plan on being as prolific as you with all the podcasts. You know
Oh,
how many that you do. Mine there'll be less of them and they'll be quite more technical. But
mm,
later on, we'll get into some other cool stuff. But I want to
yeah.
get through the technical part first. And
Well,
yeah,
mine is an addiction, and you'll find out how easily into doing these.
that's funny.
That's why I do so many, because I can't not do them. It's just like, I want to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah, you know, the only thing really keeping me from doing it is my day job, and we'll
Yes.
be
And
working
this
on that.
is
So
and this is something else I do want to talk a little bit about. Legia has a Patreon channel, and if we get enough people on there, eventually Legia can do this full time, and it will
and
be
I could do
beneficial
more.
for everyone to have her doing this full time because you do such a wonderful job and you have such amazing guests. I mean, not me, but
Oh, come on, you
Frank,
too.
and yeah, but Chris. I mean, Chris Beskar. I mean, I can't even believe we got him on the show. Actually, I still have to pinch myself sometimes.
I do have to pinch myself. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I've had so many good, really great guests, and
you
that's really,
have.
and they will come back. More people are coming back to come on, and
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
everybody has so much information that we need to get out there to help humanity and help the world and help create what's creation, whatever we have going on here. We're
absolutely.
ascending to a higher realm, and we need to have the tools to continue to do that, and
Yeah,
to know what to do. And
yeah,
we're getting the downloads, we're getting the codes, we're getting everything that we need. It's like
yeah.
I was watching the Matrix last night again for the first time in years with
Okay,
Kat and
okay.
another one of the people in our group named Adam. And it was fun to rewatch. I recommend anybody that hasn't seen The Matrix in a while, just rewatch the first movie again and see
My
what you
brother
see.
likes it a lot. Yeah, he likes
But
that movie a lot.
take a look at, because there's things in there that you might not have seen the first time, or you
Yep,
forgot, you know, and just
yep,
little things that you go, oh, now I know what that means.
exactly.
So,
Yeah,
and he was getting downloads. He got, definitely a certain type of download, but we're getting those. We're going to be able to do everything that Neo does.
yeah. And everybody is getting them, and everybody has these abilities. They just need
Yes.
to focus their intent. That's the biggest thing. And meditate. I'm
You
not much for meditating the way that you guys meditate. I actually meditate to the stereo full blast, which is
all different
weird.
types of meditation. You
Yeah,
don't have to do
weird,
it in
right?
one way, whatever works for you.
Yeah,
And don't allow yourself to get distracted. I think that's the hardest thing about the human experience, is that we can get distracted so easily and do other things that we don't really need to do. And really, instead of focusing our intent on what we need to focus on to make things
yeah.
better. And
Our mission,
our
essentially.
missions are to make things better. So
Yeah,
that's what we have to do. That's all. To just focus on that and don't allow yourself to get distracted by anything that's happening that doesn't matter. That in the
yeah,
long run, in the light of eternity, does it really matter?
yeah. We have won this battle. There's just some things that need to be tidied up on Earth, essentially, with the deep state guys. But we have won this battle already.
Yeah,
There's
it
no
already
question
has
about that.
been
Yeah,
fought and won.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, thank you again for having me on. And we have 17 shows I talked to you about planned
Mhm.
for the future
Yeah,
with me and you on potentials.
right.
And some of those shows will also put on my channel as well.
Yep.
So that there's more coverage and people get to see stuff more, and then Cats as well if she wants to, and just
We're
so
gonna
that
flood the
everyone's.
internet. We're gonna flood the interwebs.
Oh, and having said that too, uh, Chris Beskar, Stavatti Aerospace started a new YouTube channel as well. So everybody should check it out, right?
Yes.
He There's only one posting on there about the little sport plane, but eventually I think there's going to be a lot of really cool
Oh,
stuff on it.
oh yeah. I'm beginning I see it in my mind right now. I can visualize all the stuff
Yeah,
that's going to be on there. So
yeah,
he has a channel on, it's called Stavatti Aerospace on YouTube. It's very easy to find. So
yeah,
check that out too.
yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. Yeah, check him out. And hopefully we'll be talking to him soon. We'll be talking to him soon on potentials
Yeah.
again, because he's agreed to come back on at some point here. Yeah, it's fantastic. Like
We look
again,
forward to that.
amazing to have contact with him, direct contact with him, and he is just such a nice guy. That's the other thing, right? Yeah, like you said, very kind
Yes.
and big heart.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yes.
I mean, literally, the technology that he worked on with Pete Peterson and Ken Shoulders is going to change the world.
Yeah.
It's that
Absolutely.
simple. It's literally that simple, right? And I just got shivers when I said that.
Yes. Shivers all over. So, well, thank you everyone for watching, and thanks Ed again for coming on my podcast and being a big part of it
Yeah,
and
thank
helping
you.
my channel grow. You've been a really big part of that, so I really appreciate it. And thank you for all of the beautiful, wonderful energy that you give us. So
It's been awesome fun too. Yeah, working with you, and yeah, and yeah, we just like you said, we have to focus our energy on all the good stuff
yep.
and shut your TVs off, shut everything off. Just focus on what you love. That's a big
Mhm.
thing. And get into nature.
Yes.
Get into
Yes.
nature. Get
Be
back
around
into
some
nature.
really good positive vibes. spend some time with your pets, spend some time out
Yes.
in the beautiful outdoors because the
Yep.
weather's going to start getting nicer now. It's spring. Go out and to the
Hmm.
park and
Yep.
be around all the beautiful nature and take your dogs with you. And, whatever makes you happy,
Yeah.
just go do that.
Exactly.
That'll make you, focus, be able to be in the mind space and the heart space where you can, receive some beautiful downloads they're going to help you take you to the next level. We're all
Yeah.
going to the next level together. So,
And
yeah,
this is what Legia loves, so that's why she does so many of these. And she's, yeah, you can just tell, right?
yeah,
You have beautiful energy too. You bring it to the show every time.
thank
And I again want to thank you because
you.
without you, I mean, I started with Andrea with the university presentation,
Mhm.
and that's actually how I ended up connecting with you as well,
Right.
because it was I think it was I connected you with Andrea originally in the beginning, and with Frank,
Well,
which is really cool,
actually, I think it
right?
was the first connection that you and I had was with Dave Rossi in the group
Yeah, in the
in the
group, yeah, exactly, yeah,
on calls.
yeah.
And then I think I reached out to you by email and you sent me back some
I
things.
I showed you my amorphous output transformers from my tube amps that I had built or got designed and built in Malaysia by
Yes.
Jolin at JK Audio. He is the best coil winder in the world, period, hands down.
Yeah.
I had somebody else before, and he retired. He was a NASA scientist, retired. And then I took 2 years to find him, Jolin. If anybody wants to do wicked audio stuff, he's the man, and he's a good friend of mine. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah. So again, thank you so much, and so looking forward to all the next ones too. Yeah. Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be able to. I don't like talking about myself very much, so I'm a little bit nervous, but thank you again. It's
Well,
been
you did a
wonderful.
great job. You did a great job. And thanks for coming on again. Everyone, check out Tech Envoy. It's going to be Technological Envoy, but the insignia says Tech Envoy just to make it simple. And
Leach is
yes,
working on it right now.
which I did, which I just did his little insignia. But yes, so it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be fun. So check out his channel, and we'll catch you next time, everyone, on Potentials. Ciao for now.
Bye.